The 22nd of October 1944. Cold wind over Fort Douglas, Utah. A group of German women stepped off the trucks, their boots still heavy with the mud of war. They had been told they'd be punished, maybe humiliated, maybe worse. But when the gate closed behind them, something strange happened. No shouting, no beatings, just the smell of bread warm, real bread drifting from a kitchen. An American nurse handed one of them a blanket, smiled, and said, "You're safe here." She didn't understand. None of them did. These were their enemies. Why were they being treated like people? That moment would change everything she believed about America, about mercy, and about what winning really means. Because inside those quiet barracks, the United States was fighting a different kind of war, not with bullets, but with kindness. And what happened next would shock both sides of the Atlantic. Stay till the end to see how one German woman's story turned into one of the strangest, most powerful lessons of World War II. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video to support our channel, and help us tell more forgotten stories of history that deserve to be remembered. It was the last cold week of October, somewhere near Aachen. The sky was low and white, the air filled with the smell of smoke and wet leaves. Anna Vogel, a 27-year-old German field nurse, had been awake for 2 days straight. The field hospital she worked in was collapsing around her, the tents torn by artillery, the stretchers half buried in mud. When the American shells stopped, she thought it meant death was coming, but it meant surrender. She had grown up hearing that capture was worse than dying. Nazi radio said that Americans treated prisoners like animals, that women would be humiliated or shot. So when she saw the olive green trucks roll in, her knees went weak. She hid a small pistol inside her coat pocket, not to fight, but to end herself if they came too close. The irony came fast. The American soldiers who surrounded the wounded Germans didn't shout or strike. They moved like practiced workers, calm and quiet, checking pulses, calling for stretchers. One sergeant, his name stitched on his coat. Miller took off his gloves, knelt beside her, and said in slow German, "Bleiben Sie ruhig, you're safe now." She didn't believe it. Not yet. They placed the wounded onto trucks. The engine's diesel roar mixed with the moans of the injured. The smell of gasoline and blood filled the air. Anna stared at her hands, still red from dressing wounds, and realized the war was no longer something she could control. It was happening to her now. For the first few hours, fear was stronger than pain. She waited for the strike that never came. The Americans searched her bag, found only bandages, a Bible, and a folded letter from home and gave it back to her. She was led into a barn that had been turned into a temporary holding station. Straw on the ground, tin cups of water. No shouting, no guns pointed at heads. She heard one of the prisoners whisper, "They're feeding us?" Another replied, "It's a trick." That night, a medic came by with a clipboard. He spoke gently, using simple words. He asked her name, age, and if she was injured. When she tried to sit on the wooden bench, she gasped. The bruise from a collapsing wall ran deep across her hip. The medic noticed. He said something to a guard, and moments later, someone brought a folded cushion, thin canvas stuffed with straw. She didn't know it then, but that cushion would follow her through the next 2 years. It would become the quiet symbol of everything that confused her about this new reality. Outside, trucks rumbled endlessly toward the west. The Americans were pushing deeper into Germany, capturing whole divisions. By November 1944, more than 300,000 German soldiers were prisoners in Allied hands. Many were wounded, exhausted, and hungry. Few had ever imagined being treated with care. When Anna was loaded onto a larger convoy the next day, she sat beside other nurses and young clerks who had also been captured. One of them muttered, "They'll send us to Siberia." Another said, "We'll never see home again." But instead of the harsh cold she expected, she saw American soldiers handing out metal cups of hot coffee and bread with butter. The paradox was unbearable. The enemy was feeding them. During the long train ride to the port of Le Havre, Anna kept staring at the window bars, half waiting for cruelty to begin. But the guards smoked quietly, passed food, and sometimes even joked. She heard one American tell another, "They're just kids." At night, she couldn't sleep. The ground shook with the movement of trains carrying ammunition eastward. She thought of her younger brother still fighting near Cologne and wondered if he'd survive the winter. She prayed quietly, not for victory, but for mercy. When the ship finally left France for America, the ocean stretched grey and endless. The prisoners were told that under the Geneva Convention of 1929, They would be protected, given food, medical help, and fair work. Anna didn't understand what that meant yet, but she saw order where she expected punishment. On the second morning at sea, she looked around the deck at the rows of captured Germans, young, tired, silent, and realized the war she had been told to die for had already lost its shape. The world beyond the Reich was not made of monsters. It was made of men who followed rules she had never known existed. But this was only the beginning. The ship reached America on a cold November morning in 1944. The ocean mist was thick and white, and the coastline looked unreal, quiet, clean, and far too peaceful for people who had come from hell. Anna stood at the deck rail, clutching her coat. Behind her, hundreds of German prisoners stared in silence. Some crossed themselves, others whispered prayers. They had been told many stories about America, that it was a land full of crime, wild soldiers, and cruel punishment for enemies. But as the harbour grew larger, they saw a flag waving over neat rows of warehouses and cranes. A band of Navy men played a march somewhere on shore. It didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a dream she didn't trust. When the ship docked, military police directed the prisoners down the gangway. Anna's boots touched the wooden pier, and the boards creaked under her weight. She expected to be shouted at, maybe hit. But the guards spoke calmly, using short English words. This way. Line. Up. Keep moving. They didn't yell. They didn't point guns in their faces. Inside the processing building, the smell of soap and hot coffee filled the air. That smell alone made her dizzy. It had been months since she'd been near anything clean. Each prisoner was given a numbered tag, checked for lice, and inspected by a doctor. When Anna's turn came, she froze. The doctor was a woman, something she had never seen in uniform before. The doctor smiled and said, "You're safe now, Fräulein." It was the first time an Allied officer had spoken to her with kindness. They were sent by train again, this time inland, to a prisoner of war camp in Utah. The journey took 3 days. From the small train window, Anna watched the landscape change. Green fields, then deserts, then mountains with snow on top. She wondered how far she was from Cologne, from home, from her mother's house that might already be gone. At night, the guards walked through the carriages, checking on the prisoners. One of them offered her an apple. She hesitated, but took it. The skin was red and cold against her palm. She hadn't eaten fruit in months. It felt strange to taste something so alive while she was a prisoner. When the train stopped, she saw barbed wire, guard towers, and long wooden barracks Fort Douglas, one of the many POW camps across America. By the end of the war, the United States held more than 425,000 German prisoners in over 500 camps spread across the country. The camps were built fast, with rules that followed the Geneva Convention. Each prisoner was to receive food, shelter, and pay for work done. The gates opened, and the new prisoners walked in. The first shock was the smell, not filth or blood, but wood smoke, cooked beans, and bread. Inside, the floors were clean. The bunks had blankets. Anna's group was led to a women's section, small but orderly. They were given soap, towels, and uniforms marked PW. She expected humiliation, maybe forced labor. Instead, an officer explained the daily schedule. Breakfast, work duty, medical check, lights out. Everything had rules. Everything was written down. Even punishments were mild extra duty. Loss of privileges. No beatings. On her first evening, Anna walked past a small garden behind the barracks. A few prisoners were tending rows of cabbage and onions. One looked up and smiled at her. She couldn't smile back yet. The habit of fear was too strong. That night, she lay awake, listening to the wind outside and the sound of boots on gravel. Every noise made her flinch. She whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, they will show their true faces." But morning came, and nothing happened. The guards brought oatmeal, milk, and fruit. She saw one German prisoner joke with an American cook. She saw another write a letter home. It didn't make sense. Days passed. No shouting, no hunger, no beatings. Instead, she saw men reading English books, attending classes, and building furniture for nearby towns. She saw order and fairness, things her own army had long forgotten. One afternoon, she received a small metal tag with her prisoner number and the word Geneva. That word began to haunt her. She asked a translator what it meant. He told her, "It means you have rights." Rights. The word felt strange on her tongue. Every small act, a blanket, a smile, a cup of coffee, worked against everything she had believed. Each kindness hurt a little. like sunlight after darkness. She wrote in her small notebook, "They follow rules even for enemies. Maybe that is why they win." But her real lesson came next, not from a book or speech, but from the simplest thing, a cushion and a chair, because when she tried to sit, the pain returned. And what they did about that pain would change her forever. The pain started again one morning, while she was helping in the camp laundry. Anna bent down to lift a wet sheet, and her hip throbbed like fire. She bit her lip, trying not to cry. The bruise from the collapsing wall months earlier had never healed. She had walked through capture, ships, and trains, pretending it didn't exist. Now the work, the cold floor, and the long hours made it worse. A guard noticed her limp. He said, "You should go to the infirmary." The word sounded dangerous to her. In the Reich, injured workers were often sent away and never returned. But the pain was too sharp to hide. So she followed the guard to a low white building near the fence. Inside, the air smelled of soap, metal, and medicine, sharp but clean. A nurse in a blue uniform motioned for her to sit. Anna hesitated, then slowly lowered herself onto the bench. It hurt so much she gasped. The nurse, an older woman named Ellen, frowned. "You're in pain," Ellen said softly. "Let's fix that." Anna didn't understand all the English, but she saw kindness in the nurse's face. That frightened her more than the pain itself. She wasn't used to compassion from the other side of the war. The doctor arrived, a young army physician with round glasses and a steady voice. He asked her questions through a translator. How she was injured, how long it had hurt, if she could walk. When she told him about the wall that fell on her during a bombing raid, he nodded and said, "You should have been treated long ago." He ordered X-rays, which amazed her. In Germany, only officers or civilians with connections could get such treatment. Here, even prisoners did. When the image came out, the doctor pointed to a faint line on the film. "A hairline fracture," he explained. "Not serious, but painful." He handed her a small bottle of pills, penicillin. At that time, it was one of the most valuable drugs in the world, and she knew Germany barely had any. One of her own patients back in Aachen had died for lack of it, and now the enemy was giving it to her, freely. That night, she sat on her bunk staring at the bottle. The irony was so heavy it made her dizzy. She whispered to herself, "They heal us while we fight them." The next morning, Ellen brought her a cushioned, firm canvas filled with soft straw. "To help you sit," she said with a smile. The same simple kindness that had followed her since capture returned, stronger this time. When Anna sat on it, the pain eased slightly. She almost cried from relief. Days turned into weeks. Her hip began to heal. She started to walk without limping. The doctors checked on her regularly, and the nurses always smiled. It wasn't just her other prisoners received dental care, bandages, even eyeglasses. The Americans treated over 400,000 German POWs with medical support during the war. The rules demanded it. Article 14 of the Geneva Convention. She began to see how serious those rules were. Even the guards respected them. One day, she overheard two Americans arguing. One said, "They're the enemy," and the other replied, "Yeah, but we still have to treat them right. It's the law." That argument stayed in her mind longer than any speech. Her fear slowly melted into confusion, then curiosity. She began asking questions about the American Red Cross, about their hospitals and schools. The translator told her that in America, doctors didn't ask who you voted for before treating you. That small sentence broke something inside her, a belief she didn't even know she carried. Sometimes, at night, she would press her hand to the healed spot on her hip and whisper, "It hurts when I sit," but not from the wound, from the thought that they care. She began helping in the infirmary after she recovered, folding sheets, cleaning tables, passing bandages. Working beside the nurses taught her more than any propaganda ever I had. She saw black and white soldiers working together. She saw women in charge of men. She saw compassion as a form of discipline, not weakness. One day, Ellen said to her, "War ends faster when people stop hating." It was simple English, but it hit hard. By the start of spring, 1945, Anna could move freely again. Her body was healing, but her beliefs were not. Every act of kindness tore away another layer of what she'd been told. She wrote in her notebook, "The wound is almost gone, but what they are teaching me still hurts." Soon, she would learn that American mercy came with structure rules, duties, even small payments for work. That too would surprise her. But for now, she sat carefully on her cushion, under the wide Utah sky. wondering what kind of world could exist where enemies treated her better than friends. By the time summer came, Anna's hip had healed. The snow on the Utah mountains melted, and the camp looked less like a prison and more like a small, strange town surrounded by fences. Every morning at 6, a bell rang. The women lined up outside the barracks for roll call. Guards counted them quickly, checked names, and then sent them to breakfast, oatmeal, bread, sometimes eggs. It was never much, but it was always enough. For Anna, the order of each day was both strange and comforting. Back in Germany, war had made everything uncertain. Sirens, ruins, hunger. Here, everything followed a pattern. Even the guards seemed trapped in their own routines. Some were kind, others were cold and quiet, but all of them followed rules written in thick binders, stamped with Geneva Convention. Anna learned about those rules one afternoon from a translator named Clara, a young American woman who spoke good German. Clara explained that prisoners had rights, food, shelter, medical care, even small pay for work. "You are soldiers," she said. "Captured, but still human." That sentence confused Anna. She had never been called human by an enemy before. After breakfast, the prisoners walked to their work areas. Some repaired uniforms. Others worked in the camp gardens or kitchens. A few, including Anna, were assigned to the laundry. They washed sheets, uniforms, and sometimes the guards' clothes. For each day of work, they earned tokens, small pieces of cardboard that could be exchanged for cigarettes, postcards, or small comforts in the camp canteen. The first time Anna received her tokens, she didn't know what to do. "This is payment," Clara told her. "It's yours." Anna stared at the thin pieces of cardboard in her palm, unable to believe that even prisoners could earn money in America. In the canteen, she saw jars of jam, soap, and even magazines. Some POWs bought chocolate and shared it. For the first time in months, she tasted something sweet. It was such a simple thing, yet it felt like a miracle. The camp also had rules about respect. No guard was allowed to insult or touch a prisoner. No prisoner could hit another. Every Sunday, the bell didn't ring. It was a rest day. The women washed their clothes, wrote letters, or sat under the trees talking quietly. Sometimes, Anna would write in her notebook. She described the sound of laughter from the American kitchen, the way light came through the wire fence, and the smell of pine trees after rain. She still hated the war, but she was no longer sure who she hated in it. The Americans followed a strange kind of justice, strict but fair. When one German woman was caught stealing bread, she wasn't beaten. Instead, the guards took away her canteen privileges for a week. The fairness confused everyone. One prisoner said, "They punish us, but they never try to break us." Anna began to see how the Americans' power came from rules, not fear. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They simply enforced order like clockwork. It was a quiet kind of strength she had never seen before. In the evenings, the prisoners returned to the barracks. The guards locked the gates, but never shouted, "Lights out." The women read, sewed, or told stories about their homes. One night, a guard named Miller, a tall man with gentle eyes, stood by the doorway listening to their songs. When he smiled, Anna felt something inside her shift again. He said softly, "You all sing like you're already free." No one answered, but everyone felt it. Later, Anna asked Clara why the Americans were so careful with rules. Clara thought for a moment. "Because when this is over," she said, "we want to be able to say we stayed human." That line stayed with Anna for days. It explained everything, the medicine, the food, the fairness. As the weeks passed, the camp became a small society. The Germans cooked their own meals, grew vegetables, and even organized small concerts on Sunday evenings. The guards didn't stop them. They said it kept morale high. One afternoon, Anna watched the American flag rise over the camp. The sun caught its red and white stripes, and for the first time, she didn't feel fear, only curiosity. What kind of country built fences but filled them with dignity? She thought about the people back home, about bombed houses and empty pantries. She thought about her brother, still fighting somewhere in France. Would he believe her if she wrote that Americans treated their enemies with respect? Probably not. Maybe she wouldn't have believed it either, if she hadn't lived it. That night, she wrote one sentence in her notebook. "They keep us behind wire, but they have given me back a kind of freedom, the freedom to think differently." Soon, that freedom would grow dangerous. News from Germany was coming, and with it, guilt, anger, and the first letters that made her question whether she could ever go home again. But for now, she lay on her bunk, listening to the guards' distant laughter, and realized that mercy could be stronger than any wall. By autumn, the Utah air turned dry and golden. Dust swirled around the fences, and the camp seemed quieter. Most of the women had settled into routine, but inside, their thoughts were never still. They talked less about war and more about people, the guards, the nurses, the translators who somehow made this strange life feel almost normal. Anna had grown close to Clara, the young translator who had first explained the Geneva rules to her. Clara visited the barracks every few days, checking letters and helping prisoners understand notices. She always smiled, never raised her voice, and treated them not like enemies, but like women who had simply fallen into the wrong side of history. One afternoon, Clara brought a small box filled with donated books. They were old and worn English novels, some picture magazines, and even a German-language Bible. "You can borrow them," Clara said softly. "It helps the days pass faster." Anna picked up a small book of poems. Inside the cover, someone had written in pencil, "For whoever needs a quiet place inside their head." That small message hit her harder than she expected. It wasn't propaganda. It was simple kindness, the kind she had stopped believing in. Among the guards were also a few American women, mostly nurses and administrators. They were nothing like the German female officers Anna had known in the Reich. There were no cold eyes, no shouted orders. They wore simple khaki uniforms, their hair tied back, and spoke to the prisoners with calm professionalism. One of them, Sergeant Ellen Moore, was in charge of camp supplies. She had a sharp voice and quick hands, but a gentle heart. She treated everyone, guard or prisoner, the same way, fair and firm. When a German woman once refused to work, Ellen didn't yell or threaten. She simply said, "You don't have to work, but everyone here contributes something. That's how we stay human." That phrase, "how we stay human," became something of a quiet motto in the camp. Ellen also made small gestures that changed everything. She insisted that women receive sanitary items monthly, and she organized warm coats for the coming winter. None of this was required by military law, but she did it anyway. Because dignity, she said, is not a luxury. Anna noticed how the women guards talked to each other. They joked, shared cigarettes, helped carry heavy boxes. There was no rank in their laughter. To Anna, it looked like freedom, not just political, but personal. In Germany, women were told to serve, to obey. Here, women gave orders, and men listened. One day, Clara sat with Anna by the fence during a break. The air smelled like sage and dust. Anna finally asked, "Why do you help us? We are your enemies." Clara smiled gently. "You were soldiers," she said, "and soldiers do what they are told. My brother fought in Italy. If he were captured, I'd want someone to treat him this way." That answer silenced Anna. For the first time, she saw war not as good versus evil, but as people trying to survive orders they didn't choose. The camp slowly became a strange bridge between two worlds. The Americans learned German songs. The prisoners practiced English words. When a snowstorm hit that December, guards and prisoners worked together to shovel paths. One night, an American cook even invited a few women to the kitchen to help bake bread. The smell filled the camp warm, sweet, almost like home. When they ate, everyone sat together for a few minutes. No one speaking about sides or nations. Just people, tired and hungry, sharing bread in silence. Anna thought of her mother's kitchen before the war, when everything smelled of flour and safety. But kindness brought confusion too. Some prisoners began to feel guilty for being treated well, while their families in Germany starved. They whispered, "Do they feed us so we forget?" Others said, "Maybe they want to show the world how good they are." Still, even those doubts couldn't erase the truth. The Americans didn't stage kindness for show. They lived it quietly, every day. Anna once overheard Sergeant Moore telling a new guard, "Don't ever humiliate them. We're not Nazis." That sentence, spoken casually, shook Anna deeply. It was as if the line between cruelty and civilization was that simple. A choice made daily, not a flag you served. As Christmas approached, the camp organized a small concert. The prisoners sang carols in German, and the Americans listened respectfully. Then, to everyone's surprise, the guards joined in with Silent Night. For a few minutes, the entire camp sang in two languages, one melody, under a sky full of cold stars. When the song ended, no one spoke. The fences, the war, the pain, all still there but thinner somehow, as if music itself had filed the barbs down. That night, Anna wrote it in her notebook. "They say the enemy teaches you who you are. I think they are teaching me who I could be. But soon, new letters from home would arrive. Letters that carried guilt, hunger, and shame. The news from Germany would remind every woman behind that fence that mercy had its own weight. By early 1945, the war in Europe was collapsing. In the Utah camp, the snow had melted into soft mud, and the prisoners waited restlessly for mail from home. For months, many had received nothing. Then, one grey morning, the first batch of letters arrived, thin envelopes covered in stamps and censor marks. The women gathered near the mailroom like children waiting for sweets. Anna's hands shook as the clerk called her name. Inside her envelope was a single sheet of paper, written in her mother's careful handwriting. "The city is gone," it read. "Your brother is missing. Food is scarce. But we are alive." The words blurred before Anna's eyes. Gone. Missing. Scarce. She read them again and again, as if they might change. But they didn't. That night, she couldn't sleep. The barracks felt too warm, too quiet, too full of comfort she hadn't earned. The next morning, she couldn't eat her breakfast. The oatmeal, the bread, it all tasted like guilt. Around her, other women looked pale and silent, clutching their own letters. Some cried quietly, others just stared into nothing. For months, they had lived in a strange peace, warm beds, fair rules, regular meals. Now the truth from home shattered that fragile calm. Their families were hungry, freezing, living in ruins. And they, the captured, were the ones who were safe. Anna heard one woman whisper, "My children eat potato peels, and I eat eggs." Another said, "Maybe we are the lucky ones, but that feels worse." Even the guards noticed the change. Work became quieter. The canteen stayed half empty. The laughter that once filled the evenings vanished. The Americans didn't interfere, but they seemed to understand. One guard left an extra bag of apples by the barracks door with a note, "For your letters." One night Clara, the translator, found Anna sitting outside alone. The air smelled like rain and pine. "You heard from home?" Clara asked gently. Anna nodded, unable to speak. Clara sat beside her in silence for a long time, then said, "I know it's hard, but your being alive, it still matters." Anna looked at her and whispered, "Does it? My mother digs through rubble, and I sit here with a blanket and warm food." Clara didn't argue. She just said, "The war took enough from the world. Don't let it take your heart too." That night, Anna opened her notebook again. She wrote, "I am safe because I lost. My family suffers because they stayed." She didn't know if it was fair, but it was true. Over the next weeks, more news came about the bombings of Dresden, the fall of Berlin, Hitler's death. The camp buzzed with shock. Many prisoners refused to believe it. Others broke down, crying or praying. One woman fainted when she heard that her entire town had burned. The Americans didn't celebrate. They lowered their flag halfway and kept the camp quiet. "The war is ending, Sergeant," Moore told them, "but peace won't come easy." After that, something strange happened. Some German women began helping the Americans more willingly. They sewed uniforms faster, cleaned without complaint, even taught the guards German phrases. It wasn't obedience, it was something deeper, a quiet wish to give back, in small ways, for the mercy they had received. Anna found herself helping in the infirmary again, this time with both American and German patients. She changed bandages, carried water, and wrote letters for those who couldn't write. The smell of medicine and soap filled the air. And sometimes, when she worked beside Clara or Ellen, she forgot for a moment which side she was on. But at night, the guilt always returned. She dreamed of her mother in the ruins, her brother lost somewhere in Europe. In the dream, they stood outside the wire fence, looking at her with cold eyes. "Why are you warm when we are cold?" they asked. She always woke before she could answer. Still, even through the guilt, Anna began to see something clearly. The Americans were not soft. Their kindness had discipline, purpose. They believed that fairness was a kind of strength, and she began to believe that too. When the Red Cross came to inspect the camp, the officers noted how clean and calm it was. One report said, "The treatment of prisoners here shows the power of democracy's conscience." Anna didn't understand every word, but she understood the meaning. America's way of fighting was different. It wasn't only with guns, but with decency. Weeks later, the war officially ended. The guards read the announcement aloud. Some women cheered, others wept. Anna just sat still, staring at the fence that had become both her prison and her teacher. She thought of everything she had seen, the nurses, the translators, the food, the fairness. and realized she would never think the same way again. But the hardest part was still ahead, going home. As she packed her few things, a notebook, a borrowed Bible, and her old uniform, she wondered what waited for her in Germany. Would they call her a traitor for speaking kindly of Americans? Would her mother even be alive to hear her stories? The trucks came at dawn. As the gates opened, Anna looked back one last time at the camp that had given her warmth, guilt, and truth. She whispered, "Thank you," though no one heard her. Ahead lay her homeland and a reckoning with what it meant to survive. The journey home began on a cold April morning. The war was over, but the world still looked wounded. The trucks that carried Anna and the other women drove through quiet American towns. Children waved at them, not with hate, but with curiosity. The women waved back, unsure how to feel. Some smiled, others cried silently. After days of travel, they reached the port. Ships waited in the grey harbour, their decks crowded with men and women prisoners from camps all across America, now being sent back to Europe. The sea air smelled of salt and rust. For many, it was the first time they had seen the ocean. An American officer read out their names one by one. "You're going home," he said. "Good luck." His tone was kind, but his eyes were tired. He had seen too many wars end and too few people heal. As Anna stepped onto the ship, she felt both free and frightened. The Americans had given her safety, food, and a strange kind of hope. But home, what was left of it? Would it welcome her, or see her as a reminder of defeat? The voyage across the Atlantic took weeks. The sea was calm, but the mood on board was not. Some prisoners sang softly on deck. Others sat in silence, staring at the endless grey water. Anna spent hours watching the waves, thinking of the faces she had met: Clara, Sergeant Moore, the cook who shared bread, the nurse who offered a pillow. They had all become part of her story, proof that mercy could exist even in war. When the ship finally reached Europe, the scene was heartbreaking. The docks were in ruins, the air heavy with smoke and ash. Bombed buildings lined the coast like broken teeth. The women disembarked slowly, clutching small bags with all they owned. At the processing center, German officers checked their papers. One man looked at Anna's American-issued documents and frowned. "You were well fed," he said coldly. "You don't look like you suffered much." The words hit her like a slap. For the first time, she felt ashamed of surviving with dignity. Around her, other women whispered the same fears. Would people understand what it was like to be treated kindly by the enemy? Would they even believe it? When Anna finally reached her hometown, it barely existed. Streets she had known since childhood were now rubble. Her house was gone. The church bell tower was half collapsed. People moved like ghosts, thin, quiet, exhausted. She found her mother in a small shelter made from bricks and tin. When they saw each other, they hugged and cried. Her mother touched her face and said, "You look healthy, thank God." But there was a flicker of confusion in her eyes, too, as if she couldn't understand how someone could come back from captivity stronger than she had left. At night, they shared a thin blanket and talked. Anna told her about the camp, the fair rules, the nurses, the translators, the songs. Her mother listened but said nothing for a long time. Then she whispered, "It sounds kinder than home." Anna nodded. "Yes, that's what frightens me." In the weeks that followed, she tried to rebuild a life. But the townspeople were suspicious of returning POWs. Some called them collaborators. Others said, "You were fed by the enemy while we starved." The women who had been prisoners found it hard to explain that kindness could hurt too. Anna began helping at a relief center run by Allied soldiers. She translated letters and helped distribute food. It was strange to work beside men who had once been her enemies, but she did it anyway. "I learned this from you," she told an American officer once. "Fairness." He smiled sadly and said, "Then something good came out of all this." Sometimes she visited the riverbank where children played. They were thin, barefoot, but alive. Watching them, she thought of the American camp, the laughter, the discipline, the feeling of order. She realized that the same structure could rebuild her country too, if only people allowed it. But not everyone wanted to learn. Many Germans spoke bitterly of defeat. "They humiliated us," one man said. "They made us slaves." Anna disagreed quietly, but she didn't argue. She had learned that truth doesn't always win through shouting. Sometimes, it just waits to be seen. One evening, as she helped unload food trucks, she saw an American flag painted on the crates. For a moment, she froze. The same flag that once flew above her prison now stood as a symbol of survival. She smiled faintly and whispered to herself, "Maybe perfect job for someone who had learned English in captivity." Every day, she sat between two sides, Germans trying to rebuild their country, and Americans trying to guide them without breaking their pride. One afternoon, during a meeting, an older German man muttered, "Why should we trust them? They bombed us." Anna looked at him and said quietly, "Because they also fed us." The room fell silent. No one argued. In that moment, she realized how powerful small truths could be. The more she worked, the more she saw that her time in captivity had been a strange education. The camp had been a mirror showing her what justice and discipline looked like when mixed with mercy. Now, she was using those lessons to help rebuild a country that had once forgotten them. There were still difficult days. Some Germans hated the Americans. Some Americans distrusted the Germans. But Anna stood between them like a bridge, not perfect, but strong enough to hold. She often remembered Clara, the translator who once said, "When this is over, we want to say we stayed human." Now, Anna understood what she meant. Staying human was not weakness. It was power, the kind that rebuilt cities and healed hearts. By the 1952, Germany began to rise again. New schools opened, factories restarted, children laughed in clean streets. The scars of war were still visible, but something deeper had changed. A quiet understanding that freedom was not only about winning wars, but about how you treated others when the war ended. Anna kept her notebook all those years. Its pages were yellowed, filled with stories, the nurse with the pillow, the cook with the bread, the guard who said they sang like free people. Sometimes she read them aloud to her students, young Germans who had never seen a bomb fall. When they asked, "Were the Americans really that kind?" she smiled softly and said, "Yes, and that's why we are free now." She became part of a small group of women who spoke at schools and community meetings, sharing their experiences as POWs. They called themselves the Witnesses of Fairness. Their stories slowly changed public opinion. People began to see that defeat had not only destroyed them, it had also taught them. Freedom begins with how you treat your enemy. Months passed. Anna never forgot the women she left behind in the camp, or the faces of the Americans who changed her. She began writing her memories in the same notebook she had carried through the war, the one that now smelled faintly of sea salt and old paper. She ended one page with a simple line, "I left Germany as a believer in victory. I returned as a believer in humanity." But even as peace slowly returned, a bigger question waited. What would this new world learn from people like her? Could mercy, fairness, and order truly rebuild what hate had destroyed? The answer, she would soon learn, would go far beyond her own life into the politics, policies, and future of both nations. The war had ended, but peace was not simple. For Anna, the real battle began after she came home. Germany was divided. Some people were grateful the war was over, others angry at their defeat, and almost everyone was hungry. Streets were full of broken walls and lost hopes. At first, no one wanted to hear stories from prisoners who had lived in America. They were called the soft ones. People said, "You had food, you had beds, you didn't suffer like us." Anna tried to explain that kindness could hurt too, but they didn't understand. How could they? They had lived through bombings and starvation while she had slept on a mattress under a warm roof. So, she stayed quiet at least for a while. But as the months passed, new people came into the ruined towns. Americans in jeeps, engineers, doctors, and aid workers. They brought medicine, milk powder, and plans for rebuilding. They didn't come as conquerors now, but as organizers. The same calm discipline Anna had seen inside the camp now spread across Germany itself. She recognized it instantly, the same fairness, the same belief that order could heal chaos. When she saw an American officer tell a group of children to line up for food, not fight for it, she felt a strange warmth in her chest. This was the same rule the guards had used in the camp. Everyone gets something if everyone follows the rules. In those small acts, Anna saw the same paradox again. The victors who could have crushed a broken nation instead chose to teach it. By 1947, Anna found work as a translator for the Allied administration in her region. It was years later, when Anna was old and grey, she visited the United States again, this time freely. She found the old camp in Utah had been turned into a museum. The barbed wire was gone. The barracks had been rebuilt as exhibits. Inside one, a photo showed a group of German women in plain dresses, washing clothes, and smiling faintly at the camera. She stood there for a long time, her eyes wet. Somewhere among those faces was her younger self, scared, broken, but already learning the hardest lesson of all. A young visitor asked her, was it hard to forgive them? She shook her head. No, she said softly. It was harder to believe they had forgiven us. As she walked out into the sunlight, she looked up at the American flag, fluttering above the museum. The same symbol that had once flown over her captivity now waved over her freedom. And in that moment, she understood the final truth. They had come as conquerors, they had left as teachers, and what they taught through fairness, through order, through simple human decency rebuilt not just Germany, but faith itself. In the end, America's greatest weapon was not its bombs or its armies. It was its mercy,